It's been a busy week here in the Inland Northwest, so let's get you caught up with the KREM 2 News Week in Review. I'm Cody Proctor. Thanks for watching. Over the next half hour, we'll take a look at some of the news you might have missed from the past week here in the Inland Northwest. Let's get started with one of the week's biggest stories.
Speaking today is to help me find some sort of justice for them. And I will never let him take that from me. He may have taken so much from me, but he will never get to take my voice. He will never take the memories I had with him.
It helps us to know that he is in heaven now, freed from the trials of this earth. We, however, continue to live on without the grace and support of her presence.
The world's watching because of the kids, not because of you. Nobody cares about you. You're not worth the time, the effort to be remembered.
During the entire sentencing, Bryan Kohberger kept a blank stare. He looked at the families as they read their statements, but showed no emotion. While we now know who committed the murder of 4 young lives taken too soon, we still may never know why. In a press conference following the hearing, investigators say they found no evidence pointing to Coberger's motive.
We had every resource possible, and we worked that tirelessly. Both from everything from his side, but all the victims and all the members of the House from their side. So we have never, to this date, found a single connection between him and any of the 4 victims or the 2 surviving roommates.
I asked Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson about the outcome of this case.
The Mogan family at the plea hearing had mentioned saying that this is the best possible outcome. Just wondering, do you agree with that, or would you have liked to have seen a different outcome?
Well, I think we agree with the Mogan family. Our decision was that this is the best possible outcome, all things considered, and factoring into that the defendant was prepared to plead guilty as charged. Now, if that hadn't been a factor, we'd be picking a jury for trial starting right now.
He also acknowledged the plea deal happened quickly, saying the logistics of the upcoming trial played a factor.
With 10,000 prospective jurors being summoned in, the court staff making arrangements and preparing to process that part of the case dictated that if the case was going to resolve, it needed to resolve quickly.
All right, joining me here on set is local defense attorney Steve Graham to provide some legal analysis about today's proceedings. Steve, thank you for joining us. First question I have, just kind of your overall reaction to today's sentencing hearing.
Well, it all went real quick, didn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, compared to some of the cases we've seen here in town where they've been, 4 or 5 days sometimes of victim impact statements. But people came prepared. They had their notes out. They told Coberger exactly what they wanted to say and then sat down. And so it was an efficient process, really gut-wrenching from the start to hear all the perspectives of what all was lost. Was just very emotional. We saw the prosecutor, resorting to tissues and the judge, their voice quavering. So it was rough on everybody, but they got it done. And, you heard the judge say he's off to prison.
Mm-hmm. We are now more than 2.5 years since these 4 murders took place. And ever since day one, people have been searching and wanting to know any kind of a motive for the killings. Today, we found out from investigators they were never able to uncover any kind of motive. And what do you make of that?
Well, a prosecutor doesn't have to prove motive to get a conviction, but the jurors often want to know, and certainly the public doesn't. So that's a little bit unsettling that there's so much we don't know. But I think that, I kind of take the prosecutor at his word when he said, well, we could have demanded as part of the settlement that Coberger articulate, why he did what he did. But the prosecutor had the fear that it would all be untruthful anyway. So, you got to give him, some deference there. But it's just going to be fodder for, YouTubers and crime documentaries in the years to follow. Because why would somebody out of nowhere why these kids? Why 1122 King Road of all the places? Yeah, it's it's going to fester, I think.
And kind of on a similar note, investigators were asked about if they were able to, during their investigation, uncover any kind of, I guess, path leading up to the murders. They said no, they couldn't find any kind of criminal history that may have led up to this. What do you make of the fact that Coberger seemingly went from committing no real serious crimes ever to a quadruple homicide? That seems pretty rare.
It is. Coberger broke the mold, I think, on that, because what criminology and forensic psychology tells us is that there's signs along the way if you can just determine them. And he had some struggles in life, but no prior criminal history at all, no real documented encounters with the police, no antisocial behaviors that manifested themselves. You compare this to, other cases across the country, and it just stands out. And it's going to kind of leave people with their heads scratching.
We have time for maybe one more brief question, about 15 seconds left. How important, in your perspective, was that piece of DNA evidence on the knife sheath at the scene to being able to wrap up this case?
Yeah, it's hard to see the police really solving this without that. During the press conference, you heard the investigators say, well, maybe we could have just ruled out every white Hyundai Elantra in the Northwest, car by car, but I think that would be difficult. It's really, that was his one big mistake that really made the things kind of collapse on the defendant, is just leaving that one little bit of DNA on the sheath. So, yeah. I mean, lucky for the investigators, they had that.
Indeed. All right, Steve Graham, local defense attorney. Appreciate your time and perspective.
Good to be here.
Welcome back to the KREM 2 News Week in Review. Before we get back to this week's headlines, we want to remind you, you can get the latest news and weather forecast anytime you want on KREM 2 Plus. It's our streaming app you can watch on your TV, and best of all, it's free. We hope you'll check it out, but now let's get back to the Week in Review.
A website this afternoon giving us our first look at hundreds of pages of investigative reports. They detail everything from the first moments Moscow police responded to the home on King Road through 2 years of investigation. The reports detail the horrific crime scene investigators found on November 13th, 2022, including signs of a struggle in Xana Kernodle's room and graphic descriptions of injuries to all 4 victims. We also now have narratives of interviews with inmates who shared space with Bryan Kohberger in the Latah County Jail. One of them describes the now convicted killer as intelligent and polite, but having strange habits like washing his hands multiple times a day and staying up all night. Hundreds of pages have been released, but there are thousands more, including court records, that are still under seal. As we learned last week, the court will now begin an exhaustive effort to go through all of those, though some of those documents may never be made public.
I hope everybody can understand the immense amount of information that's in this investigation is going to take a lot of time to prepare. It has to be gone through legally to be redacted or figured out whether or not it can actually be released.
Judge Stephen Hippler said last week that process of going through all the documents will take months, if not longer. And we are still combing through Moscow PD's investigation records that were posted. Stay with KREM 2 News as we learn more details, and we'll keep you updated on air, online, and on KREM 2 Plus. Shannon Mowdy, KREM 2 News.
Now that the Coberger criminal case is over and the gag order lifted, authorities are releasing documents. One is an interesting look at Coberger's life behind bars, with one inmate calling him a weirdo, another calling him annoying. Police interviewed the inmate at the Latah County Jail in the cell next to Coberger's. He called him intelligent and polite for the most part, but Coberger quickly became annoying because of some of his habits. He would wash his hands dozens of times a day and would spend 45 minutes to an hour in the shower. Coberger would be awake almost all night and nap during the day. Detectives asked the inmate if Coberger ever lost his temper. The inmate was watching sports one time and said, "You suck," to one of the players on the team. Coberger immediately got up and put his face to the bars and aggressively asked if the inmate was talking about him or his mother. Did the murder suspect ever mention anything about the crimes, detectives asked? The man said Coberger did not mention his alleged offenses at all. A second batch of documents was released later in the day. They described the savage nature of some of Coberger's crimes, including one victim who was stabbed in the face several times. This is the beginning of what we expect to be thousands of pages of documents released by authorities in Idaho. I'm Chris Ingles in the King 5 newsroom.
Thanks for joining KREM 2 News this weekend. I'm Cody Proctor. Right now, we're taking a look back at some of the news stories from the past week.
Coberger, who was a criminology student at Washington State University, pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and 1 count of burglary. Last month, during the plea deal proceedings, the state said it planned to prove in court that he was near the King Road home before and after the killings, and the DNA evidence tied him to a knife sheath found at the crime scene. They did concede they would not attempt to prove he intended to kill all 4, only that he did end up killing them all. Reactions to the plea from the victim's family are mixed.
We are grateful for the gift of her life, and we have grieved the loss of that life during each of these 962 days. We love you, Maddie, and we miss you. We support the plea agreement 100%. While we know there are some who do not support it, we ask that they respect our belief that this is the best outcome possible for the victims, their families, and the state of Idaho.
Meanwhile, the family of Kaylee Consalves says they are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. In a statement, the family of Ethan Chapin from Skagit County says they are relieved to put this behind us.
Just about 10 years ago, Idaho looked at the cost of carrying out the death penalty, but the group charged with that study essentially said the state lacked the data to do so. But they did conclude capital punishment cases take longer, are more complex than non-capital punishment cases, and costlier. However, Oregon and Washington did do in-depth analysis on the issue. The Washington study, published in 2015, looked at 147 aggravated murder cases spanning 17 years. Researchers found, combining all cost categories, the average total cost to the judicial system related to pursuit of the death penalty are about 1.4 to 1.5 times more expensive than death penalty not sought cases. And they write, the total average cost for death penalty cases is a little more than $3 million versus about $2 million for death penalty not sought cases. A difference of $1.06 million in 2010 dollars. That difference is even greater now when adjusted for inflation. Oregon published its study in late 2016. It looked at hundreds of aggravated murder cases between 2000 and 2013. Its findings were similar to Washington's. Researchers wrote, results indicate the costs for aggravated murder cases that resulted in death sentences range on average from about $800,000 to more than $1 million more per case when compared to similar non-death aggravated murder cases. Researchers noting, aggravated murder cases that result in death sentences are more complex. More time, more effort, and more resources means more money on average per case. This, they write, is a simple fact. Now, you may be asking, what about states that are politically more aligned with Idaho than Washington and Oregon? Well, a study by the Oklahoma Death Penalty Review Commission that used 16 years of data also found life in prison is substantially cheaper than seeking the death penalty. We'll have links to all those studies on our website, KREM.com. In the studio, I'm Mark Hanrahan for KREM 2 News.
The death penalty is very expensive.
Robin Marr with the Death Penalty Information Center says along with saving victims' families from years of trauma and uncertainty, plea deals do, in fact, save taxpayers time and resources.
Every study that's been conducted has shown that it is more expensive to sentence someone to death and execute him than to incarcerate him for the rest of his natural life in a maximum security setting.
Why is the death penalty so much more expensive than life imprisonment?
Well, this is the most extreme sanction that we can impose on a human being. And so there are a lot of procedural safeguards that are involved in the process.
A DPI analysis shows most death penalty cases do not end up with someone actually being executed. Inmates sit on death row for years while their appeals play out. Judges often overturn their convictions or sentences. Idaho hasn't executed anyone in more than a decade. The Department of Correction tried to execute Idaho's longest-serving death row inmate Thomas Creech last year, but staff couldn't insert an IV line into him. And now, a judge has halted his sentence. Although, this year, the U.S. as a whole did see an uptick in executions.
The more meaningful evaluation of whether people are supporting use of the death penalty now and want it to continue are when we look at jury sentences. And juries are increasingly saying no to the death penalty.
Last spring, in the same Idaho courthouse where Coberger has appeared, a jury said yes to the death penalty for Chad Daybell.
So pursuant to Idaho Code 192515, the court is directed that the defendant would be sentenced to death on those counts.
He was convicted of killing his first wife and two of his current wife's children. State prosecutors are also pursuing capital punishment in at least one other high-profile murder case. But if the death penalty isn't used for a man who brutally stabbed 4 college students to death, some question who the death penalty is meant for.
That's a great question. There is a lot of frustration sometimes when people see extreme crimes that don't end up in an expected death sentence, and other crimes that don't look like they merit a death sentence ending that way. It says something about how arbitrarily the death penalty is used, and that also creates a lot of public concern about its use.
Does this show that it's going to be unlikely that we're going to use it moving forward?
I don't think you can ever make that kind of prediction based on the outcome of a single case. What I think is really encouraging about the outcome here is that all the parties got together and made a good decision in the interests of everyone.
Welcome back. Before we wrap up this edition of the KREM 2 News Week in Review, we want to remind you that you can get the latest newscast and weather forecast anytime on KREM 2 Plus. It's free to watch and download for Roku, Amazon Fire, and on Apple TV. Now here's one more story before we go.
What do you miss most about her?
Just her laughter. Her sense of humor was amazing. She was very funny. I miss her smile. I just miss the way she loved her siblings, the way she loved her family, the way she loved her friends, the way she just brought joy to everybody around her. She was a beautiful human being, and her spirit lives on with all of us.
Well, unlike the activity at Ada County Courthouse, here in Moscow at the Vandal Healing Garden and Memorial, it was quiet.
On the University of Idaho campus in Moscow, the sun shines over the flowers and the 4 names, Xana, Ethan, Kaylee, and Madison, who were murdered by Bryan Kohberger. One local business owner, Debbie Lee, says the town of Moscow can finally rest.
Because this is such a tragedy, and nobody deserves to live with that hanging over them. And
free from the fear and tension that began just down the road.
Just that weird sense of entitlement people have to where they can take a tragedy and just work it to their weird benefit. It was stunning how cruel some people can be.
Lee says another chapter of the story can now begin.
And now that this stage is over and we all know what the situation will be for him, there's going to be another level of healing.
As families and friends continue to grieve and heal, the town of Moscow can finally take a collective deep breath and move forward.
And although nothing can make up for the 4 young lives lost, their names will be forever in memoriam here in Moscow and across the country. I'm reporting here in Moscow, Idaho. Regan Gallo, KREM 2 News.
Keep it here for more news and weather updates throughout the weekend. And don't forget, you can watch our latest newscasts anytime on your schedule on KREM 2 Plus. Download and watch right now for free. I'm Cody Proctor. Thank you for watching the KREM 2 News Week in Review.